Hello and welcome to the Future of Work podcast with me, Dr. Mona Mustafa. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about a topic that continues to take center stage, and that is employee well-being. Now, for most adults, we spend the majority of our waking life at work. This provides organizations with an opportunity to influence the well-being of their employees. To discuss this topic, I'm very delighted to have with us today in the studio my co-host, Dr. Vic Benuena, who's a professor specializing in human resource management. And also, we're delighted to catch up with the Managing Director of Wellbeing at Work, Mark Rix. Mark, it's an absolute pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here, Dr. Vic, Dr. Mona. Always great to come and talk about the future of work and how HR leaders are hopefully planning and implementing new strategies to improve people's lives at work.
That's fantastic. Mark, we're really happy to catch up with you because I know you've just spent 2 months in Saudi Arabia where you launched the summit there for the second time. And tomorrow is the summit here in Dubai, celebrating its 10th anniversary, I believe.
Well, the 10th anniversary is relevant for the company as a whole. I actually think that it might be the 9th edition of the event in Dubai. But you're correct, we are celebrating our 10th anniversary as an organization. Wellbeing at Work was set up in 2014 in England by Chris Cummings, my colleague, who his partner at the time was suffering from stress and anxiety and not really receiving the kind of care and attention and support that you would hope for from an organization. So Chris at the time was working for an international events company and decided, you know what, I'll do this myself. I'm going to go on a mission to encourage every company in the world to strategically prioritize well-being. That was it. That was his purpose. Now, 10 years later, we have 10 summits. We call them summits. So normally it's a Tuesday and a Thursday in the country we're in 14 countries. So it totals 20 events, and the calendar starts in February in the Middle East. And this year, yes, it was yesterday, the 20th of February in Riyadh, and tomorrow in Dubai. And it's going from strength to strength. Riyadh was really interesting because up until last year, we didn't have an event in Riyadh. So when we announced 6 months prior, so that would have been what, like October-ish or autumn 21, we're going to launch in the Kingdom. The response was magnificent, you know, from big organizations, from public and private sector leaders that wanted to take part. I think is a good word, a good way to describe it. Take part in the conversation about what is happening in Saudi Arabia to increase the focus on employee well-being and mental health. And the fact that we come along, created this environment, this stage, this platform, to be able to do that is really exciting. So yes, the second edition yesterday was superb. We had a fantastic day of discussion and sharing experiences and learnings from small organizations, large government entities, which we can talk more about. And then tomorrow, obviously, you know, Dubai. It's great to be back in Dubai. I lived here for 10 years, so like home from home. And we've got a great response, big audience tomorrow, lots of wonderful speakers, including yourself, Mark. So yeah, we're very excited.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mark. You know, I was preparing for this session, you know, and I came across so many reports like the McKinsey report. There was the CIPD report as well. And what's really interesting is that a lot of organizations are, of course, still paying attention to this topic. Because we know from statistics, for example, I'll give you examples of the McKinsey report. They found that employee disengagement can cost up to 355 million a year in lost productivity. And the CIPD report was launched, the last report that was launched in 2023, has highlighted something quite, something that really is standing out is that employee absenteeism rates is the highest, for a decade. It's now the highest ever recorded in the UK. And we want to know what's the reason behind this increase. So, Mark, what's your take on that?
I think, first of all, you're right, and we've read similar reports. I mean, there's one that I was reading recently was the Gallup State of the Global Workplace 2023 report, which is a rolling report over the last decade with a huge sample. And interestingly for the Middle East, I talked about this yesterday on stage at the event in Riyadh, that 85% of people in the Middle East are disengaged at work. And that's
huge.
Incredible.
Yeah.
You know? So only 15 out of every 100 people going to work in the morning are actually bothered or engaged with what they're doing, you know. So there lies potentially one reason, I guess, is that it's not enough. Pay and benefits is just not. So here in this region, obviously there's a lot of tax-free salaries and that kind of thing. And maybe some employers think, well, that's enough. We're going to pay you a nice tax-free salary to get on with it. So part of the Gallup research was saying essentially that, it might be a nice place to live, but is it a nice place to work? So organizations need to look beyond pay and benefits. What else is going on to engage and to actually enable people to live their best life, which has become, I've noticed personally, I subscribe to this theory that the definition of well-being is my best life lived. That's how I would define well-being. So if an organization is doing enough their well-being strategy or strategy to enable me to feel that I am living my best life, and that's a big part of my life. So I think it all goes back to what are organizations doing beyond pay and benefits to create a world for their people where they can thrive.
Right. So that's an important piece, isn't it? Like disengagement is quite a big one. I want to now, Vic, come to the concept of presenteeism and leavism. So that was an interesting piece where actually 63% of employees surveyed reported some sort of leavism in their organization, which basically, talks about employees who are on leave. They're still doing some kind of work, although they're on, official annual leave. Why do you think that is? And what can organizations do to support employees to really disengage in that sense when they're on leave?
Yeah, I've got a tough question, haven't I?
I'm glad I didn't get that one.
These are not new phenomena. They have always been there, but they've gotten very, very bad very recently. And that's purely because of the tools that we have around us, the gadgets that we have. In the 80s and the 70s, you do not check your email. They were not in existence at the time. At the moment, we have email set up on our laptops, tablets, mobile phones, and you name it, wherever you can access your work from. So although people go on leave and by statutory regulations, they should be disengaged from work completely, they don't. I do the same thing. And that's because of compulsion, fear, and the idea that if you don't do things for the workplace, then you're going to get into trouble. So that's one aspect of leavism. Presenteeism, which featured a lot in Japan very recently, was sort of risen to a level that has never been in history, purely because of the COVID also. People just started thinking differently, that work is enough, but at the same time, what is life worth living, as Mark has said. So people tend to go to work, but they don't really do the work. As Mark has said, 85% of people are disengaged. So literally they are being paid for only 15% of their contribution. But that could also be because of several factors around us. The financial system is a big one. People are always thinking about how to pay their mortgage or pay rent, particularly in UK, for example, where rent is through the roof. Mortgage prices have gone up because of the mini budget. Which
fuel prices.
Yeah, fuel prices.
Yeah.
Commodity prices have gone up as well, partly because of the Brexit. So a lot of macro variables are impacting on individuals like me and you who work in organizations. And we cannot really separate work from our personal life anymore. It's just all integrated.
Yes, I agree with that. And I think, to add to that, you are almost expected to be on call 24/7, because you have no excuse to hide unless you're in somewhere like that, no broadband connection. Otherwise, really, you can check, can't you? You do know that I messaged you, don't you? You just chose to ignore it. So those kind of pressures, I think, in a toxic working environment are very negative. So organizations need to have those policies and the culture whereby they insist that you actually resist and have boundaries to responding to things like that.
That's
Spend
great.
quality time with your family, that you take your leave, that for high-performing teams, you would probably have managers that are how do you define a leader? Probably someone who's creating leaders. So if you are developing people in your teams who can replace you, then that makes it easier for you to have that quality time.
Right. And also for presenteeism is, we tend to also see employees who are not well still coming into coming to work. So what role can organizations do, Mark, what can they do to sort of create a culture where, look, if you're not well, you don't have to come to work. It's acceptable to stay away.
I think that boils down to essentially trust. I think if you're an organization that's already established, you've been running for 30 years in a certain way, it's very difficult just to stop and say, right, okay, now we're going to do it completely differently next week. So that doesn't happen. So it's a process of time and a commitment to a new way of work, I think. So I think that's underpinned by the training of the manager training, and to train, I think, in the new world as coaches. So that command control, if you like, method of management is redundant. You have to be able to listen. You have to be a coach. Yeah, not just listen, really listen, and listen to what's not being said. So, and interpret that. And I think a lot of debates that we hear around the world in the summits, for example, is that a one-size-fits-all well-being strategy doesn't work. Increasingly, personalization is a trend that will get bigger and bigger. So what works for Vic doesn't work for me or you. You have different priorities, different circumstances that have to be taken into account. That variation is obviously very expensive when you're dealing with a workforce of 10,000 people, right? However, that then raises the other question of how do you justify the ROI or the return on value or return on investment. You know, it's just not easy. And I think that's why our summits are successful, because people are realizing, leaders are realizing it's not easy, and we need to talk about it and explore the best ways and which are the best providers of solutions. What works, what doesn't work, why doesn't it work, why does it work? You know, to share that globally and locally.
Mark is absolutely right. But in addition to that, in addition to the trust that you've mentioned, there is also the element of national regulation. So in countries where the employee's well-being is integrated into the national law, i.e., you know, Scandinavian countries, Germany, and UK to a large extent, you will notice that if people are not feeling well, they can take days off. And that has historically been the case. Maternity leave is part of that. Paternity leave, which is now a big thing in Europe, is a big part of it. So if the national framework allows people to take off days, then managers have no other option but to abide by those regulations. But in countries where these things are not in place, nationally speaking, then, of course, people will be worried about missing on a few days of work if they need that to recover. But you don't see that a lot in countries that are, you know, extremely progressive by the standards of well-being in the laws of the country.
Thank you, Vic. Yes. I want to talk a little bit now, Mark, about financial well-being, which is, you know, looking at well-being in terms of, you know, a holistic approach. We know from, you know, studies like, you know, the CIPD report that came out, there was another piece of statistics that said over half of UK population reported struggles with paying bills and keeping up with their credits and so on. So what role can organizations do to support the financial well-being? Because usually that doesn't take center stage. It's usually the mental well-being, physical, and that's kind of at the back somewhere.
Well, I think the number one probably pressure for people in organizations. They might not talk about it openly. And again, that goes back to a psychologically safe environment, talk about things like that, personal financial issues and so on. So again, if an organization is investing in the right way in its well-being strategy and caring for the mental health and well-being of its employees, things like an employee assistance program, for example, with counseling and available advice from experts, would help people maybe to take a different view and change potentially the approach to personal finance. So companies could facilitate services that educated people potentially in a different way. That might help. It's not the panacea, but you can't just increase wages randomly and pay people more money. So I think the underlying answer probably is for organizations to bring in experts to help their employees. Because if that is occupying your entire thought process all day and all night, because you might not be able to pay your bills or school fees or turn the heating on, pay for food, or whatever it might be at that level, you're not going to be engaged at work. You're not going to be motivated, productive. And how's that a good thing for an organization? So it's in the organization's interest to understand what their people are going through. But it won't be the same for everyone. And this goes back to that personalization, whereby if their line manager or their team leader or their supervisor, whatever, if they are coaching correctly, if they are leading those teams correctly, if they are engaging with their subordinates correctly, they will understand, know about these issues and raise them. That is how you hear the heartbeat of your company, what needs to be done. If you're not listening, you won't know. Then people go, that kind of pressure on somebody will cause stress and anxiety and burnout, absenteeism, sickness, poor mental health, illness, vicious circle. So unless you're listening and acting on what you're hearing, it's never going to get better.
And Vic, what's your view on the financial well-being?
I think there are two elements to it. The first one is internal, which is within the organization. They can pay a fair wage, but the definition of that fair wage is subject to debate and subject to where you are in the world. So although the requirement will be that organizations have to pay those fair wages, and in most cases it should be above the minimum wage. What about countries that do not have minimum wage? You run into a problem there. But even with countries with minimum wage, like the UK, Germany, there are macro problems that impact on the ability of companies to increase wages. For example, the over-financialization of markets, where there is constant greed and sort of motivation to get more money as much as possible for the financial institutions, that can creep into the organization's ability to increase wages. So we know what happened in the UK, and Mark has touched on that. But where the interest rate is constantly going up, the cost of borrowing also rises. And if that happens, the company that we find in Europe, for example, or United States, they are not going to be able to have that surplus that will enable them to increase salaries. So there are macro factors there, but as Mark has said, there are also internal issues. And I think to solve this problem, both business leaders and government officials have to sort of meet and discuss these issues and ensure that the well-being of employees is not compromised.
Yeah.
Great.
And we should add that there has to be some level of responsibility on individuals as well, I think, to doing the right thing as far as they can.
And looking at the burnout as well, there's many causes of burnout, obviously, but it has again been reported that the number one cause is toxic work behavior.
Yes.
What does that mean to you, Mark? What is a toxic work behavior?
My experience, toxic work behavior or toxic environment boils down to line management not being capable of dealing with people correctly.
Right.
That's it, in my experience. And again, that goes back to this whole thing of personalization. So you could have a company with 10,000 staff, but you haven't got one guy or one person, one manager looking at 10,000 staff. So broken down into teams, you have team line managers and team leaders and so on. And if they are doing their job correctly, if they're trained correctly, if they are coaching and encouraging and trying to encourage their subordinates, their team members to be the best version of themselves, then they will be listening to them, they'll be understanding them, and that creates a safe environment, positive culture. If they're being ignored, if they're not receiving the development they need, if their personal issues are not understood, that creates a toxic environment.
Right. And Vic, any add-ons to that?
Well, without excusing line managers, we've also realized that globalization has increased over the years. And so there are more cross-cultural teams in organizations today, in the Middle East for certain. There are so many people coming from over 190 countries. And if you think of it from psychological point of view, the in-group and out-group behavior defines the level of toxicity that we have in organizations. So people don't necessarily like each other naturally. We try to tolerate, accommodate, and help people around us. So if you go back to that level of thinking, sort of biological, anthropological element of human beings, you will find more and more people from different cultures disagreeing at the workplace. And that can lead to trust issues that Mark has talked about. But I fully approve of what Mark said, that line managers have the responsibility to ensure it doesn't happen.
Right. So it's, managers, leaders' responsibility and the culture.
Well, yes, ultimately, but the leadership of the organization, whatever that organization is, sets the tone, right? So they have to walk the talk. They have to be seen to be living those values as well. And you could even have, I guess, a highly positive, high-performing team in a toxic culture because that line manager actually gets it, does all the right things. But what's going to happen? They're going to leave. And that's where organizations lose talent, competitiveness, sustainability. So it has to come from the top. This is one of the big problems with Wellbeing as an investment, is convincing the C-suite to invest, because being able to demonstrate the value through data is still emerging.
Yeah. That's, very interesting, isn't it? It's like setting an example as a leader. That's very
I'll give you a great example, if I may. Yesterday, had a conversation with the chief operating officer for Saudi Arabia's National Infrastructure Fund. And she is in charge of 100 people at the moment. We're going to be 200 people actually involved with that fund, part of the 2030 vision for Saudi. In terms of leadership style, she walks the talk. And I said, well, how? How do you walk the talk? She said, well, we created our values for the organization. And 100 people's no mean team, right? It's and it's going to double. So she said we work together to create our values. And one of those values was, like empathy. Great word, and a really powerful thing for leaders to demonstrate. And her son was diagnosed with autism when he was 6 years old. And to actually come out publicly and talk about that and how she coped with that and how the organization supported her and how she dealt with it, and in the context of the role that she has, which is a very public, high-profile post, was amazing, right? And what it did, it told her team that if you've got an issue, you can come talk to us, and we'll support you and we'll help you. In the context of your role and your life within this organization, it's okay not to be okay. Come and tell us about it. Let's talk about it. We find a way. Because we have empathy. I just love that. I thought she was fantastic. And that, for me, is a leader who's walking the talk. And that's the kind of place you want to go and work. It's positive. It's encouraging. You're going to be engaged. You're going to have loyalty. It's unlikely that, all being equal, you're going to leave. So the retention is low. The absenteeism will be low. The illness, the anxiety, the stress, all those things will be in much less evidence in an organization like that, where the leader is doing it.
That's a great example. Thanks, Mark. Vic, there are some organizations that provide financial incentives for employees in order to boost their well-being. For example, if you lose weight or if your physical health indicators improve, you get like a cash incentive. What do you think about these initiatives? Are they sustainable over the long run?
The short answer is no, they're not sustainable. Because businesses are in business to make money. There's a big difference between businesses and charities. So although these days the expectation is to be a nice employer and go above and beyond what traditional organizations would do, it boils down to the degree to which you provide those incentives. So the element of weight loss, which is a great thing to do, but then company taking that upon themselves to sort of start solving personal issues for employees, it's great. But then over the long run, and we've all seen this over the past 3 years when most businesses just don't have the money to continue, it may not be sustainable in the long run. But, there's a big but. It's still a good thing to do. It is a good thing to do because there are people who genuinely need that support. There are vast majority of people who do not have the ability to personally lose weight. So I'm not sure if this is true. These days you can't distinguish what is true and what is not true on the social media. But I've heard that there's a company that devotes 1 hour to its employees to do physical exercise every day. And I think that's a great thing to do if it's true. But then the financial element is also great. But beyond that, can organizations create a sort of fund so that when people are struggling, they can call on those funds, as is the case in the UK. I know people who are working 3 jobs to survive, particularly women who have young kids. It's just not working at the moment. The cost of living crisis is huge and it's extremely troubling to almost everyone.
Yes, that's true. That's a global issue as well. And I think
issue.
the other uncertainty is the anxiety and stress brought on by climate change and fear of that. I think there's 60 elections globally or something this year. Uncertainty politically this year is huge.
Yeah.
So many pressures, macro pressures. And I agree with Vic, it shouldn't be on every organization to solve every single problem for their people, but fundamentally have a responsibility when they've employed somebody to listen to them. Might not be able to help. First starting point is to listen. Empathy,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes, Mark, we talked about earlier on about absenteeism rates being one of the indicators that something needs to be done if your absenteeism rates are high. But what could be some other indicators that the well-being aspect is not going very well?
Well, I think attrition, people leaving, that for me, that would be a particularly stark metric of my well-being strategy not working. Turnover, sales, obviously, customer service, that's another good indicator. What's the rate of your customer complaints? And how is that tracking? Because you're less likely to deliver a good customer service if you're dissatisfied, disaffected, not engaged. So sales, customer service, attrition, and the cost of care, I guess, cost of healthcare. So what is it costing your company to provide healthcare for your people? How's that tracking over time? Because if it's getting worse, there's a signal. So those for me would be the key indicators of a failing approach to well-being.
Yeah. And as we were walking for the recording today, you said to me, having a pool table, that's not going to work. And it's interesting you mentioned that, Mark, because most organizations actually have a standalone well-being initiative, and it's like they think that's going to fix everything. We looking here at a more holistic approach, and interestingly, McKinsey is working, with the WHO to come up with a more modern term.
Yeah, I think so. And
yeah.
we often have this conversation, I say we internally, and sometimes with our customers and partners, or even organizations that want to do things right and not quite sure how to change and go about doing things differently. And they say, "Oh, we're going to do something with well-being," and it's like, it's not something you can just go buy off the shelf. It's not like a software package that you buy and install and off you go. For me, what the well-being is, the sum of all the things that you do that contribute to a degree of well-being.
So it's, I think, to really wrap up the discussion, it's absolutely what you said. It's not something you can buy and plug and then it will fix everything.
No, not at all.
A more holistic, modern term is looking at a holistic approach to well-being, which includes the social, psychological, physical, all of these elements. I think it's different layers, isn't it? Like, we need to look at the work itself.
Yeah.
We need to look at teams.
Yes.
We need to look at leadership,
Yes.
the culture of the organization as well.
We do. And there's one other thing that we haven't touched on. And in fact, it was in Dubai in December. We had an event with Microsoft. And we talked about the global trends in well-being and so on. And one of the trends and the forecasts going forward, this is one of your questions I was looking at earlier, actually, Mona, was what are the trends going forward? And I think it's for organizations to have a very clear position on what their purpose and impact is in their community. Whatever that community is, global, local, global, what role and what impact what we're doing having in those communities. Because I think as well, talk about millennials, alpha generation increasingly will be coming to you as a potential employee, demanding what are your values vis-a-vis the climate change, for example. What are your values in terms of being and people, and if you can't explain that, your level of on the spectrum of being an employer of choice is going to be adversely affected. So I think impact in society of an organization and what it is something that will become a bigger topic.
That's right. And Vic, any final comments from yourself, maybe touching on maybe the role of trends in terms of different countries might have different sort of issues. I know, Mark, for example, you lived in Oman, you just came from Saudi, UK. Yeah. Maybe there's different trends that we see.
There is.
Different,
Yeah, it's down to what makes the individual happy, isn't it? The environment counts a lot. So there was a study just last year by Santander Bank and FT. And I saw the countries that were the highest in terms of well-being coming from Asia, which contrasts a lot what the World Happiness Report says about Scandinavian countries. UAE is number 3, for example, with that index. And I was thinking, why are the two different indices contradicting itself? But then that boils down to what I've just said, the environment, the culture, and also the leadership framework of the different countries. But what I would like to say finally is that change is always a difficult thing to achieve. And so, in agreement with Mark, lots of organizations will be hesitant to introduce proper well-being initiatives. just like it took several decades for us to accept that men have to be given some sort of paternity leave. So I believe over time, very soon, organizations globally would embrace the idea of having a dedicated sort of initiative, perhaps aligned with HR, Human Resource Department, to oversee all the well-being initiatives for employees. We need it. We all saw what happened during the COVID. We lost friendship. We lost companionship. We were working in silos. But I believe with little incremental changes, and organizations will embrace this and things will be better for the whole world.
I agree.
That's great. Well, that's all we've got time for in this episode. Thank you very much, Mark. We're absolutely delighted to catch up with you because I know you're in Dubai for just a few days and then you'll fly back to the UK. And thank you very much, Vic, for these insights as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.